Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, even. Um, Hope you're doing well today and you're excited for today's session. Obviously, we are on a bright Monday afternoon, so I hope you're feeling ready to get engaged with today's session. Thank you for kind of tuning in and joining us. We're excited to kind of gain as much information as we can over the next 45-ish minutes. And today's session will include an interview with our speaker before we'll later move on to a student Q&A. So questions for our speaker today can be submitted via the Q&A function that you'll find just underneath the stream on our website. And depending on what sort of device you're using, you might have to scroll down just a little bit to be able to see the Q&A box. It's open now and it's going to remain open throughout the rest of the session. So please do submit as many questions as you'll like in response to anything that's said today, as we love to hear from you. And now's a chance to get all of your questions answered. Now, if you find yourself to be experiencing any sort of technical issues, please do let us know via that Q&A box, and one of our moderators will be on hand to help where we can. Now that that's all done, we'll move on to the main event today. So we're very, very excited for today's speaker, and we're so happy that he's agreed to join us and talk to us a little bit about his career and how he ended up where he is now. Kind of leading the global conservation efforts and really making a huge impact on PlantLife. So everybody, please welcome the CEO of PlantLife, Ian. Welcome.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. It's really lovely to have you, and we're very excited to sort of pick your brains and get as much information as we can.
Great, let's go for it.
Okay, so starting off, just so our students can learn a little bit more about who you are as an individual and where you've kind of come from, could you give us a little bit of like a career highlight and a little bit of a career journey, and then a little bit on what it is you do now?
Yeah, of course. Well, great to be with you. I've been with Speakers for Schools now for nearly 10 years, but this is the first time we've done a live broadcast, so this is new for us as well. So quite a long career. So in fact, I'm just coming towards the end of it. I've now been working for over 40 years, and did my first degree way back in the 1980s. And my first degree was actually in natural sciences. So I really focused on some chemistry, some physics, some maths. And then increasingly through my degree, became very interested in plants and insects, particularly, and the interaction between plants and insects. And really that set me off for the rest of my career, that I'm very interested in how things connect. So joining things together, joining the dots together to see what kind of outcomes we can understand, but also help impact. However, I ended up going into industry, so I've had a very, very varied career. And for anybody on this call, you've probably got quite a lot of working life ahead of you. And don't be at all concerned about moving from one career to another. Just make sure you've got transferable skills that you can take with you. So I've spent 25 years in the oil industry and lived and worked around the world. So lived on mainland Europe, lived in Tokyo, in Japan, lived in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, and variously I've had responsibility for businesses across the entire world. But after 25 years, I decided that enough was enough in business, and switched across firstly to work for the British Antarctic Survey, and had a wonderful 3 years. The British Antarctic Survey, based in Cambridge, amazing organization. It has research stations down in the Antarctic, it has one in the Arctic, it has ships, it has aircraft, and it does incredible work. So transitioning from the corporate world into the non-corporate world, into um, more of the conservation field and the climate field, I was first able to do that through joining the Antarctic Survey. I then became the chief exec of the Galapagos Conservation Trust. Many people on this call will have heard of the Galapagos Islands. They're about 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador, made famous by Charles Darwin and theory of origin of species and theory of evolution. and ran that conservation charity for about 3.5 years, and really started to focus the conservation efforts in Galapagos with the local community as well as on very endangered species. Then actually took a sideways step and became chief operating officer at one of the big research universities. Very, very interesting to see how universities impact society through their research. And about 5 years ago, joined PlantLife. And PlantLife is the UK's only conservation charity focused on plant and fungi conservation. We also operate around the world in about 50 countries, 55 countries. We have 24 nature reserves in the UK. Relatively small organization. We're about 100 staff. Um, but we've got brilliant staff and they do an amazing job in terms of conserving species and habitats all around the UK. And a big part of our work is we try and influence governments to make the right decisions for nature. So we work at the UK level, but we also work across England, Scotland, Wales, and beginning to work in Northern Ireland to try and make sure that the policies and the frameworks and the legal structures are as friendly towards nature as we can make them. So that, Charlie's about 40 years of career.
Yeah, very, very interesting to reflect on. And it's really interesting to know that you worked in sort of oil and now you've ended up conservation. And that does feel like a complete 360 almost, doesn't it? It's like um, a switch to go from working with something that's underground to working with the plants that grow on the ground. So, yeah, really, really interesting to have a listen to how those kind of careers can change and taking those skills through to use on different things. Really interesting. Maybe we'll ask some more questions about that later. But moving on to our next question. Um, Obviously, we talk about conservation, and I feel like it's quite a big concept. So, could you kind of give us a little bit of a definition or the aim of conservation? And then tell us a little bit about what first attracted you to, you know, becoming the CEO of PlantLife, and that sort of world.
Yeah, so let's kick off with conservation. You break it down into its words. So we're looking to conserve, and we're looking to in the part that I work in, we're looking to conserve the natural world. Now that's really a very top level title and a word. It captures an awful lot of activities that take place within conservation. So at its simplest, it's looking at what we have to protect, which if we were not doing so would be lost. And the UK is already one of the most nature depleted countries on the planet. We've lost an extraordinary amount of our natural world in the UK. And that's large habitats. So when I talk about habitats, I'm thinking about um, native forests or meadows. It could be heathland. It's depending with some of your schools, it might be the upper moorlands in the Midlands and the north. It might be some of the parkland in London. So habitats are areas which have a particular vegetation in them, and then within those habitats you have lots of species. So you can conserve at a species level, which is an individual type of animal or type of plant. So we might be trying to um, conserve, for example, the juniper tree. The juniper is one of our three native fir trees in the UK, and in the south of England, it's disappearing very quickly for a number of reasons. So you can work at species level to try and protect a species, or you can work at habitat level. So up in Scotland, for example, we've just achieved UNESCO World Heritage status, which is the most, I suppose, the most significant protective status globally for the peat bogs up in the far north of Scotland. So you can conserve at lots of different levels. You'll all be familiar, all of the schools and all of people on this call, you'll be familiar with the work around the very iconic species. So the big cats, the panda, the whales, polar bears, etc. Those are effectively conservation activities as well to try and protect some of our most iconic species. We do it because we're in a pretty poor state all around the world at the moment in terms of the state of nature. And if we aren't active in protecting what we can and recovering everywhere we can, we will begin to really struggle as a society. And that's why in my title, that you need nature, nature needs you. And there's no longer an option not to be working for nature, and we'll come on to this a little bit later. But we are fundamentally biological animals. We require oxygen to survive. I'm not suggesting any of you try this, but if you don't breathe for 2 or 3 minutes, you are likely to end up in a very significant health problem. So we are entirely dependent upon plants on this planet to produce our oxygen, including some of the plants that live in the water, some of the phytoplankton. And if we don't take care of nature as biological entities of nature, we are going to be in very significant difficulty. What attracted me to conservation? Well, you can work in some amazing places. A lot of the time, you're not behind a phone or a desk or a laptop. I am obviously today. Um, so as a job, it gets you out in nature, and it gets you in amongst the natural world. You listen to the sounds. You hear what's going on around you. You get the smells of a beech forest in autumn are just amazing, or a meadow in summer, for example. And visually, they're spectacular. So conservation, firstly from a well-being point of view and from a career point of view, just gets you outside a lot of the time, which is great. I would say you're also working with really good people. People who are working in conservation are very values driven. They're doing it because they really want to make a difference. So my colleagues in PlantLife are some of the best colleagues I've ever worked with. And that's really good to be working with people who are great fun and very expert to work with. Um, and ultimately, you can make a difference. And we'll come on to this towards the end, but all of us can make a difference to the world around us through our activities. And being in conservation is a way of doing that.
Really sort of interesting things there. And you've taught me something new already, because I didn't realize that juniper was a native to England. I had no idea. And I also didn't know that it was sort of going extinct in places. So it's kind of crazy to think about all these things can be happening around us and you have no idea. You just sort of take it for granted, and don't understand the ins and outs. And you obviously can't do it for everything, but it's really good to have a moment, I think, to reflect on that and to think about that, because, yeah, absolutely no idea. So you taught me two things there: that it existed
But
and it's native to the UK, and it's going.
yeah, I mean, juniper is a classic case of where climate, society, and nature interact. So juniper trees have a male and female. So not all trees do, but junipers do. So you need to have both the male and the female in the same area to enable the reproduction of the tree. But with some of the climate change that's taking place, they're more vulnerable to a particular fungi, and the fungi is what's really killing the tree, or stopping the tree from reproducing. And you typically found them on our chalk grasslands. So as we've lost more and more of our chalk grasslands into agriculture or other uses, um, then the juniper is impacted as well. So interestingly, up in Scotland, the juniper is still doing fine, but in the south of England, for all those combinations, it's really struggling. Now, the good thing is that we know what to do about it, and PlantLife has been working on juniper recovery and restoration for about 15 years now. But it's a very, very long process and it's very expensive. But we are finding in some parts of southern England and some of the downs that we are beginning to see the junipers coming back, but it requires a lot of intervention from a lot of people, and it requires a lot of money to make it work.
Unfortunately, I feel like money is always one of those things that it takes money and time to be invested to make these things work. And I can certainly see what first attracted you to the world of conservation, because it simply sounds really sort of interesting and definitely important. Um, I think it would be such a shame if we start to lose those kind of native plants and things like that. Um, it's like you've lost a piece of our history almost, isn't it? Quite a sad thing to think about. Um, Moving on to our next question then. What challenges did you face when you first started out when you started thinking and kind of entering the world of conservation? And did you find it particularly difficult to find a job that paid? Or was it something you sort of fell into and it just happened quite naturally?
Well, because I mean, from my career, Charlie, I came into conservation in the second half of my career, actively, I suppose, rather than at the beginning. And therefore, I was in a slightly different position. But before I joined the corporate world, I did do a couple of years of conservation-related work. Um, I think it's very, very important if you're interested in getting into this field. Now's the time for listeners to do it. Getting some experience whilst you can is really good. So whether that's volunteering with butterfly conservation and doing a butterfly count, or bumblebee conservation and doing bumblebees, or just going out into your local nature reserves and doing some volunteer cutting down bracken or removing rhododendrons or whatever it might be. There's a point when just building some volunteer experience is really good, and whilst you're still at school or university, that's a good time to do it because you're doing other things. Um, I would really encourage people, and this is something we've done at PlantLife, that once you start getting into a career on conservation, do it as a paid role. Try not to do that as a volunteer. Now, as conservation organizations, we are increasingly bringing all kinds of career entry opportunities into place. So it can be apprenticeship schemes, it might be intern schemes, lots of different ways of joining an organization. We make sure at PlantLife that all of those jobs are paid, because if they're not paid, you rather skew the opportunity for people who can't afford to take a volunteer job. So it's really important, and it's a message that I promote right across the sector, that we enable people to join the conservation workplace with paid roles, and paid roles that enable them to be financially viable. So we're a living wage employer, and we do that because it means that people who join us at the very beginning of their careers can actually be financially viable. I think the range of conservation organizations is so wide now that if you are really interested in joining the world of conservation, there is going to be an organization that's going to be there for you. Lots of places you can look. Now, I won't go through all the job places because it's probably a bit early for most of the listeners. Um, but there are lots of things like environment job, like charity job, etc., etc., and all these places are where conservation jobs um, are offered. Now, don't also forget that the conservation world is like any organizational activity. You've got finance, you've got human resources, you've got social media, you've got communications, you've got written media, you've got marketing, you've got partnerships, um, as well as all the conservation work itself. So within PlantLife, we have around about, say, as I mentioned, we have about 100 staff. About 60 of those staff are actually working in the field. 40 of them are doing all the kind of activities which you need in order for an organization to be successful. So you don't have to join a conservation organization as an ecologist or a biologist or whatever it is. You can join a conservation organization in marketing, in communications, in finance, in any of those areas. In IT, we have a desperate need for IT people. Um, so don't narrow your thought process in terms of how you want to join the conservation sector. If you've got skills and you want to be in the conservation sector, you can do it. Yeah, and you can apply those skills in whichever way you want.
It kind of makes me think about that idea of, like, if you enjoy conservation and you have it as a hobby, you don't have to focus, as you say, as that on a career. Do something else. If you're really good at marketing or you're really good at admin and spreadsheets, there's going to be a role somewhere that allows you to still do some of that, and that's a really kind of positive thing, I think, for students to think about, that you don't have to be boxed in and you don't have to choose something that fits a certain path right now.
Yeah, and you can do those roles in the conservation sector.
Yeah,
So we cannot run our charities and we cannot run our conservation without having really good IT people and really good finance people. So you can choose whichever way you want to come in. We make sure that all of our staff, so it is about 3 weeks ago now, but we make sure that all of our staff get the chance to go out to the nature reserves to visit our partner sites as frequently as possible. So even if you're doing a support role or a fundraising role, and fundraising for conservation is really, really important and is in very high demand. So if there's one area I would say for your students to think about is get into some fundraising activity because it, it's a critical part of what makes conservation successful. Um, so develop the skills you really enjoy, and then apply them to the sector that you want to work in.
Makes perfect sense to me, that's for sure. Um, our next question is a little bit of a turn, and we're sort of reflecting back on the world of conservation. I think some people might be watching this and maybe they don't have an interest so much in conservation. And it's just something that, they might be watching or just click on or want to, just know a little bit more but don't know a lot. So, why is conservation, particularly around kind of plants and fungi, so crucial? And how does it impact our environment and our sort of lives and things like that as well? Um, because I guess it's something that you don't really think about.
Well, that's a very, of course, that is a very big question, but I'll just run through. So, um, for all of the students on the call this afternoon, and you as well, Charlie, I just have a look around you. Have a look at the clothes you're wearing, the desk you're sitting at, maybe a carpet on the floor, whatever it might be. Could even be the metal chair or the metal table. Every single one of the items I would maybe not every single one, pretty much every single one of the items that's around you at the moment is a is a natural resource based item. It comes from the natural world. Think about how you got into school today. Whether you may well have cycled, but you probably cycled if you did with a bicycle with a couple of wheels, which had rubber tires. Rubber tires come from oil. Oil comes from historic plants. You may have gone by bus. You may have gone by car. The fuel in that came from oil or possibly gas. That comes from historic plants. So the society we live in today, which is a high energy usage society, is entirely dependent upon historic plant life and historic solar energy because it's coal, oil, and gas. Now, you then look at the clothes around you. If you're wearing a bit of cotton, it's a plant. If you're wearing a bit of wool, okay, it's a sheep which feeds on a plant. If you're wearing a bit of polyester or nylon or a fleece, fleece is an oil base. It comes from plants. I mentioned the oxygen you're breathing. Every breath which keeps you alive is a combination and an outcome of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a really fascinating process, and you'll probably be doing it at school at some point. But the principle of photosynthesis is effectively that you take the sun plus some energy, which is um, well, the sun actually provides the energy. You then take some carbon dioxide and some water, and it converts it into sugar and oxygen. So, the process of you moving your hair from your shoulder is a consequence of the sugars that come from plants because you're using energy. And whenever you use energy, you have to have some kind of intake. So it could be the lunch you had, it could have been your breakfast, whatever it is. All of those food sources provide you with the energy. And the oxygen enables you to combine with the energy to make the kind of movements and activity. And I'd just like the students on the call just to think about a number of facts I'm just going to throw at you. So you will take around about 20,000 breaths in a day. That's 20,000 activities supported by plants. Now, if you crunch the numbers, that's around about 7.3 million breaths per year. And for those of us who've got an average lifetime, you will take something like 550 million breaths a lifetime. And your lifetime on this call is probably going to be 85, 95, 100 years old. You are entirely dependent upon a healthy planet, a healthy natural world for you to have your food, take your breath, have your medicines, build your houses, whether it comes from wood or brick or tiles, the ecosystem services, flood management, water management, agriculture, healthy soils. But more than that, think about the beauty of the world around us, the culture, which is dependent upon the natural world, and the art that's determined and motivated by the natural world. So when you step back, and I could go into smartphones and think about the components of the smartphone that you're looking at during my little bit of a lecture here. There is no part of anybody's life which is not dependent upon being part of a healthy natural system. And that's why there is no longer an option. You do not have an option not to protect the world around you. And you can do that for entirely selfish reasons because you as an individual depend on it, or you can do it because many, many other species now depend on the actions that you take. Human society is so impactful that if we don't now take action, protect other species, we will lose them. So there's a self interest in this. There's also a reason for us to do so because other species are dependent upon us. And every species on the planet has a right to live. And if we are the ones who are removing that right, we need to take action to stop it. And that's why any of the roles in conservation are really important. But much more than that, the choices you now make as individuals is even more important in whatever career you take. You cannot be you can no longer be a passenger. You can't stand by and not take action. So whatever you do in your life, you now need to be thinking about what you can do to protect the planet. If we are successful in protecting nature, we will mitigate or reduce a significant amount of the climate impact ahead of us. Climate change is still going to happen, but we can start to reduce it and we can start to manage it. If you engage with nature, your individual well-being, your family well-being will improve. So there's so many reasons why you cannot today not be part of the solution in whatever decision you take.
I loved that question. It definitely was a deep question. I'm glad I answered it. And I love those facts. You've definitely taught me new. I didn't realise that on average, 20,000 seems like a lot of breaths, but I guess it doesn't really seem like a lot of breaths a day. But it's 24 hours that you're constantly breathing. So, yeah, some really interesting stuff there that hopefully will stick in our brain. Maybe one day it will come up on a general knowledge quiz and we'll think back and remember. Yeah, I loved it. We're moving on to our next question then. I will skip a few of our set questions, Ian, just so we get a little bit more time for our student Q&A. So we'll do just a couple more and then we'll move on to our student Q&A. So our next one that we'll go with is, we'll go with this one. What are some of the things that PlantLife has affected that we might be aware of? What sort of positive effects do they have? I know you said that they look after the sort of peats, meadows, and those sort of protected areas. But do you have anything in mind? I know you talked about the junipers earlier, actually, which falls within this. But do you have like another example of some of the work that you do and what that might look like?
Yeah, so hopefully quite a few of the people on this call will have been involved in No Mow May. Now, No Mow May is a PlantLife UK-wide program to encourage people not to cut their lawn in May. Now, we hope, of course, that they also don't cut some of the lawn in June and July, but May is a really important month because it's the time when weather can be pretty bad, insects are just sort of coming to life. And if you cut your lawn in May, you basically remove all of the pollinator nectar sources for early insects. So PlantLife introduced No Mow May about 6 years ago. It's now widely embraced throughout the UK. So lots of people don't cut their grass in May, but it's now also widely followed in the US, in Germany, in Belgium, in Holland, in France. Australia, New Zealand, Canada as well are all embracing no mow May. And that idea came from one of our grassland specialists who basically said, well, the way to get the public thinking about what grasslands can really do in your back lawn so everybody can have a positive impact, even if you just leave a couple of square meters of lawn uncut, if you have a lawn, you can make a difference. Now, those people who don't have a lawn, we encourage them to work with their council for local parks or for local green spaces and just leave bits of it uncut. And schools as well. More and more schools are not cutting parts of their playing fields. So everybody can be part of that. Now, the other big change, which it's probably too late in the year to notice it now, but early in the year, we now work with around about three-quarters of all councils in the UK to reduce the amount of cutting of road verges. And road verges are really interesting. Most of the time, we drive past them without even thinking. If you add up all of the road verges in the UK, you get to the county about the size of Dorset. It's a huge amount of land. But really interestingly, your road verges connect things. They connect nature reserves, they connect woodland to meadows. So they are linear, or they are long, thin connecting corridors that enable nature to thrive. So that's also a plant life program. So we've been very, very active in trying to change societal behavior to be a bit more accepting of things looking a bit scruffier. So don't cut your lawn, let it go a bit scruffy. Nature is wild. Nature is scruffy. It likes to do its own thing. Road verges, let road verges go a bit scruffy. Never risk safety. So we always encourage cutting along the edge of the road, but as you get away from the road, let it go wild. Um, those are really important. Now, Plant Life's also very active in, I won't go into too much detail, but trying to reduce the amount of nitrogen pollution. Nitrogen is very, very negative for many kinds of plants, and yet we have a lot of it in our air and we have a lot of it in our water. So we need to be reducing nitrogen. And perhaps the biggest thing which some of your students may be thinking about is we're very active in nature-friendly farming. We do regenerative farming, so we encourage less intensive, more animal-friendly farming. And if you do that, then nature really benefits as well. So lots of areas where you may not have heard of plant life, but you've almost certainly come across the outcomes of our action.
Definitely. And I love the idea of No Mow November. I actually haven't heard of it before, but I also don't have a garden. So doesn't almost apply to me, that one, but really, really interesting. And I've never
Well, it
known
does. It does, Charlie. Sorry, it does if you encourage your local council, your local green spaces. Um, Lots and lots of people don't have gardens. They're living in different kinds of accommodation. But as many of them are active in encouraging their local councils to change their management of land, so
mm,
you can be equally impactful even if you don't have your own lawn.
definitely. And I'm going to be telling my family that they've got the best reason not to mow their lawn ever, conservation. So, yeah, definitely love it. Our final question, then, before we move on to a couple of our student questions, is and you've touched on it already within that answer, actually. So I think it's a really good one. But, how can those watching, our viewers, how can schools get involved in conservation a little bit more now?
Yeah, so I think number one activity which all schools can get involved in is to reduce the amount of waste. So usage, so the amount of things we buy and use is a critical factor in damaging the natural world around us. So reducing what you're using, recycling um, what you do use is really important. So single-use plastics, get them out of your schools. Um, Move to different use, multi-use bottles, different resources. So single-use plastics, an absolute classic example of where everybody can make a difference. I think in terms of just thinking about how you um, generally consume items. So try and be sustainable in what you're doing. have a bit of a policy if if it's time to buy a new blouse or a new shirt or a new jumper, um, where you can buy something which is going to last a bit longer and recycle a previous one, whether it's through one of these recycle sites, the Vintage of this world or something else. So constantly think about your resource utilization and how can you pass it on, recycle it, second love to whatever it's called. But just think about how much we're consuming. Um, I think wherever you can, think about the natural world. Plant things, plant native trees. Get out there in your with your local conservation organisations, whatever they might be. Just look after the world around you and allow nature to be a bit wild. Your students will have heard lots of conversation about rewilding. Give nature a chance to do its own thing, and it is amazing what it will do. Can be in hedgerows, can be in any piece of grass. Um, and then more than anything else, and it's we're a couple of years away, but exercise your voice. Every single student on this call can make buying decisions that are better for the planet. You can write into people when you vote as soon as you can, and vote for the kind of people who are talking about looking after the planet in the way that you want it to be looked after. So the most important message is use your power as a consumer and use your voice as a member of society and make the change you want to see. And if you do that, we will see in the next 20 years an incredible difference in how the natural world responds to what we're doing, but we'll also start to slow down some of the climate impact, which is otherwise going to be very significant. So get engaged, be part of the solution.
So thinking of being part of a solution, then we have a question here that came in a little earlier when you were talking about kind of work experience and things. Someone has asked, how can I volunteer? So if there is a student, what can they do now while they're in school or college to kind of go out and get some volunteering experience?
Yeah, so there's a number of really, without knowing where the individual is, of course. I would always go and look at your wildlife trusts. So every county, so including London. So London Wildlife Trust, for example, is a brilliant organisation, and they have lots of volunteering activities you can do. But every single county in the UK has got a wildlife trust. RSPB, absolutely brilliant. The young person's RSPB section. They've got nature reserves all over the UK, and they love having volunteers. But also look at, in PlantLife, we encourage volunteers to do plant identification. I mentioned bumblebee conservation and butterfly conservation and bat conservation. They all want volunteers. Um, so you can go on to, if you type in volunteering for conservation organizations, just Google it or whatever, you'll get a whole range of activities. There's also lots of local ones, so really small groups. It might be volunteering at your local park. Even doing a litter pick is really good. I mean, the number of times that small mammals get stuck in bottles or cans, just going out there and doing small things like that can make a difference. So there's almost today, and the UK is brilliant at this. We have something like 40% of the UK population volunteers in some capacity or another. So almost choose your area that you want to volunteer in, Google it, you'll find an organisation willing to take you.
Simple and also effective, I guess. We forget sometimes we have the internet and we kind of sit there and go, well, I don't know what to do. How do I do that? And we forget that we now have the answers at all of our fingertips
Yeah,
attached to
lots
our
of
website.
lots of us working with young people groups. Very good safeguarding, lots of care, lots of good health and safety. We want youngsters to be outside supporting what we're doing. So many organizations are now enabling that to happen. And that's within cities as well as out and about in the countryside. So right across the UK, you can volunteer if you want to do so.
Our next question then that's come in, is quite an interesting one. It's just, what's the best career advice that you've ever been given?
Be curious. Always, always ask the question or think about the question. Um, don't don't accept whatever. I know there might be some teachers on this call. Don't accept what everybody tells you. Ask your own questions, um, and be constantly curious about the world around you, because the world is an amazing place. It's a truly amazing place. Um, the other bit of advice, which was different, it was different for me, but it's increasingly relevant, is just be very careful about what you're hearing on social media. It is very, very often not factually correct. It's not evidence based, and yet it seems to get a very broad readership. Um, there is a lot of really, really good, solid evidence around what's happening in the world around us. It's it's just as easy to find. Um, I think all of us now, we just need to be questioning. So that sort of that combination of curiosity and questioning, and just making sure that we're not believing influencers just because they're an influencer. There's a lot more sources of information and the truth around. I think the other bit of advice from a career point of view is try things. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work out. Go and do something else. Give things a go, and you'll find out what you really enjoy doing.
Definitely. We are heading towards the end of our time. I wanted to ask one more question before we end today's session, and you kind of linked on it there, so I'm going to stick it on the end. Um, was transferable skills. It's come in, and what it says, what transferable skill do you think has been the most important to your career? So as a final question, and to sort of finish that off, questioning, curiosity, remember to be your own fact checker. And you mentioned that if you want to jump there, what skill has helped you the most in your transfers to different careers?
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting whether or not the listeners this afternoon agree. But if you're going to influence the world to be a better place, you've got to be able to communicate and communicate um, in a number of ways. It can be written, it can be verbal, it can be talking with your friends, engaging other people, but finding a way to communicate what you want to happen and the changes you want to see is completely transferable all of your life. So I used to hate giving presentations or standing up in front of people and talking with people. And in the end, do it. Get used to doing it. Nobody ever beats you up for it or tells you you've done something wrong. And every time you do it, you'll get slightly better at doing it. And if you do that, you will increasingly find the ways to communicate the messages you want to convey. And you'll then start to develop the society that you want to live in, and we'll have the natural world around us that we want to all live in. So, humans we're a species of communicators. Find your way to communicate.
I think that's a great note to kind of wrap up today's session on. So, Ian, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really lovely. Before we kind of close today, do you have any final thoughts and feelings that you'd like to share with our viewers as we say goodbye?
I think uh, get outside, enjoy the natural world, and give things a go.
I love it. Well, thank you once again for coming on. It's been brilliant having you. I've learned some amazing facts, from junipers to breaths to general conservation around the UK and what PlantLife does. It's been really lovely having you on, and thank you for everyone who has submitted a question to us as well. Sorry if we didn't get around to answer your question, but we only have so much time. But hopefully you found today's session just as great. So thank you so much, Ian. It's been
Great. And thanks for
wonderful.
having me, Charlie.
No problem. All right, everyone, that's all we have time for today. A huge thank you to all of you for tuning in. It's been lovely having you. Please do keep a lookout for your emails soon, as we will be sharing a feedback form with you shortly, and we'd love to get all of your feedback. So if you have just 1 or 2 minutes, it would be great for you to complete that, and we will share all of your feedback with our speaker. That's it for now. We hope to see you next time. Hope you have a wonderful Monday afternoon. Bye for now.